They sent an ultimatum. We sent a mirror. Admiral Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the fleet flagship Balance, her form a still point in a universe of controlled chaos. Before her, the main bridge display rendered the Epsilon 7 blockade in stark clinical lines of threat. A crimson lattice of Xylos dreadnoughts held a convoy of 34 civilian colony ships in a cold mathematical grip. The demand had been simple: surrender the convoy's cryo-preserved genetic archives and advanced terraforming matrices, or face systematic annihilation. A timer in the upper corner of the holotank pulsed with agonizing slowness, marking the final 90 minutes before the Xylos Collective would begin its grim work. Status Agora. Rostova said, her voice a low anchor in the quiet hum of the bridge. The flagship's integrated fleet mind Agora responded instantly, its synthesized voice a calm counterpoint to the tension. Its avatar, a simple column of sapphire light, brightened beside her command throne. Xylos fleet remains static, Admiral. Their ultimatum doctrine holds true to all 1742 historical precedents. They will not fire before the timer expires. Commander Jax, her tactical officer, shifted his weight at his console, the light from his screen casting sharp shadows on his face. Which means they're confident we can't break their formation. He murmured, the thought hanging in the recycled air. Rostova's gaze remained fixed on the enemy line, a picket fence of warships designed to enforce a single brutal idea. The Xylos believed that overwhelming, unambiguous threats were the only true path to stability. Their certainty was about to become their cage. The doctrine was simple, but its application was monstrous. It left no room for negotiation, no space for reason, only submission or destruction. Humanity had encountered it 3 times before, and 3 times had withdrawn, unwilling to sacrifice its own to test the Xylos's resolve. This time was different. The convoy wasn't just carrying cargo, it was carrying the future of 5 separate colony worlds. They would not be abandoned on the cold ledger of galactic politics. They believe we have 2 options, Rostova stated, turning her head just enough to include Jax in her line of sight. A frontal assault they can crush, or a retreat they can mock. They have not accounted for a third. A low thrum vibrated through the deck plates, a sign of the immense power held in check within the ship's core. The air carried the faint, clean scent of ozone from the primary energizers. Agora, confirm readiness of the mirror lattice, she commanded. The sapphire light of the AI pulsed. Lattice arrays are primed and synced across the fleet, Admiral. All 72 winged drones are in position, cloaked and holding formation. Energy budgets are green. This was not a fight. It was a lesson in geometry. The Xylos ships were brutalist wedges of dark metal designed for shock and awe. They presented a solid wall of threat, their primary cannons glowing with latent energy, a promise of the violence to come. They expected fear. They expected a desperate, futile charge. What they were about to receive was a reflection of their own arrogance turned back on them with mathematical precision. Rostova had spent her career studying their doctrine, looking for the single crack in its monolithic certainty. She found it not in their ships or their weapons, but in their philosophy. An ultimatum requires an audience. It needs the other side to see, to understand, and to fear the impending consequence. The Xylos were about to learn what happens when the very act of looking becomes a weapon. Commander, Rostova said, her tone crisp, open a fleet-wide channel. I want every crew member to hear this. Jax's fingers flew across his console. Channel open, Admiral. Before the first shot, a young refugee aboard the convoy ship, Horizon's Hope, pressed her hand against the cold plasteel of the viewport. She watched the distant, silent shapes of the human fleet guardians poised against the dark. Her mother came and stood behind her, placing a warm hand on her shoulder. They're still there. The girl whispered, her breath fogging a small patch on the window. They haven't left us. The mother simply held her tighter. her own gaze fixed on the promise embodied in those specks of light. "This is Admiral Rostova." Her voice resonated through every ship in the Third Fleet, calm and unwavering. "Today, we face an opponent who believes that strength is the only language worth speaking. They have presented us with a demand that we cannot meet, not because we lack the will, but because we are custodians of life, not brokers of fear." The soft hum of the environmental controls seemed to fade into the background as every soul listened. "The Xylos have drawn a line in the void," she continued. "They expect us to break ourselves upon it. Instead, we will show them that some lines are not barriers but mirrors. We will not answer their ultimatum with violence but with clarity. We will hold the light and let them see themselves." A shared sense of purpose settled over the fleet. It wasn't the grim determination of a force heading into a slaughter, but the focused resolve of surgeons and scholars. The plan was audacious, relying on timing so precise that a single second's delay could collapse the entire strategy. It was a plan born of Agora's flawless calculus and Rostova's deep understanding of her adversary's mind. "Timer stands at 60 minutes, Jax reported, his voice tight. "Agora, begin final drone alignment," Rostova ordered, "and start the phantom energy cascade. Let's give their sensors something to chew on." The sapphire avatar pulsed once. "Executing." The drones are adjusting their positions by microns. Phantom energy signatures are being projected at the designated coordinates. The Xylos are taking the bait. Their primary sensor arrays are turning to track the ghost readings. This was the first move in a multi-layered deception. The phantom signals were decoys designed to draw the enemy's attention away from the 72 small, silent drones positioning themselves in a vast, invisible web. Their doctrine demanded they watch the threat, so Rostova was giving them threats to watch, just not the real one. Dozens of false energy signatures began to bloom on the Xylos' tactical displays, mimicking the power buildup of capital ships preparing for a warp jump or a weapons discharge. Each ghost was a lure pulling their sensor focus, forcing their commanders to divide their attention and question their perfect intelligence. On the Balance's main screen, Rostova could see the subtle shifts in the Xylos formation as they reacted, their ships making minute adjustments to face the manufactured threats. The console before Jax flickered, displaying inbound communication. "Admiral, the Xylos are hailing us. It's the commander of their fleet, Prelate Koth." "On screen," Rostova said without hesitation. The face that appeared was severe and angular, a study in rigid conviction. The Xylos were humanoid, but with a harsh, stony complexion that seemed to absorb light. Prelate Koth's eyes were obsidian chips, burning with the cold fire of absolute certainty. "Human, Admiral?" His voice was a grating baritone laced with condescending authority. "Your clumsy attempts at deception are noted, but they will not alter the outcome. You have 55 of your minutes remaining to accept our terms." "Prelate," Rostova replied, her tone even and professional, "we have no intention of accepting your terms. We are, however, offering you a chance to reconsider yours. This convoy is under our protection. It is not a bargaining chip." The air on the bridge grew thick with the unspoken challenge. "You cannot bargain with a hurricane." Koth's lip curled in a gesture of contempt. "Your sentiment is as predictable as your tactics. You posture with morality while your ships prepare for a futile attack. We have accounted for this. There is no variable you can introduce that we have not already modeled." He truly believed it. His entire culture was built on the premise that with enough data and enough force, every outcome could be controlled. "There is always another variable, Prelate," Rostova said softly, then nodded to Jax. "Cut the channel." The Prelate's stony face vanished, replaced by the cool tactical display. The phantom signals continued their distracting dance. "He's arrogant." Jax stated the observation, unnecessary but cathartic. "He can't even conceive of being wrong. That is the fulcrum on which our entire plan rests. Rostova agreed. His certainty is the weak point we will break. Agora are the drones in their final positions. Affirmative, Admiral. The AI confirmed. The mirror lattice is ready to be activated. All nodes report a stable connection and full power reserves. We are holding at your command. The deck beneath their feet gave a slight shudder as a secondary power conduit was brought online to support the massive energy demand of the upcoming maneuver. Their strength would become their shackles. Rostova took a deep breath, the scent of recycled air filling her lungs. She could feel the rhythmic pulse of her own heart through the sensitive soles of her boots. It was a steady grounding rhythm. Everything now came down to a single moment. The Xylos had built their blockade on the principle of overwhelming firepower. Their main cannons were designed to tear through the hulls of warships with contemptuous ease. But they had to be aimed. Timer is at 45 minutes. Jax announced, the number hanging like a death sentence in the silent bridge. Prelate Koth believes in numbers. Rostova said more to herself than to her crew. He believes in the simple math of force. We are about to teach him a different kind of arithmetic. She leaned forward slightly, her knuckles resting on the cool metal of her command chair. Agora, on my mark, activate the lattice. Full power, instantaneous cascade. Standing by, Admiral. The account was about to be settled. Rostova watched the timer. 45 minutes. 44. 43. The Xylos ships remained perfectly still, their weapon ports glowing with malevolent promise. They were waiting, confident in their power, secure in their doctrine. They were watching the ghosts Rostova had created for them, their sensors locked onto illusions. They're beginning their final targeting sweeps. Jax reported, his voice tense. They're locking onto the lead convoy ship, the Horizon's Hope. Let them, Rostova said. Let them aim. Let them be sure. She waited until the timer clicked over to exactly 40 minutes. Mark, activating the lattice. Now, Agora stated. In the silent void between the two fleets, the 72 cloaked drones came to life. They did not fire a weapon. They did not launch a missile. Instead, each drone projected a complex, interlocking field of pure, reflective energy. For a fraction of a second, nothing seemed to happen. Then space itself appeared to fold as the individual fields snapped together, creating a single, continuous, perfectly reflective surface, nearly 1,000 kilometers wide. It was a mirror made of light and will. On the bridge of the Xylos flagship, Prelate Koth watched his tactical display with cold satisfaction. The human decoys were flickering and dying, a pathetic last-ditch effort. His gunnery officers confirmed their locks on the lead civilian vessel. The timer was irrelevant now. He would make an example of them ahead of schedule to punish their impudence. Fire the warning shot, he commanded. One beam maximum yield. Let them witness our power. The primary cannon on his dreadnought gathered a blinding sphere of energy and discharged it in a lance of pure destruction, a beam that could crack a continent. It screamed across the void toward the Horizon's Hope, and then it hit the mirror lattice. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The beam, traveling at the speed of light, struck the reflective surface and was turned back on itself at the exact same angle of incidence. Before the Xylos gunnery officer could even register the energy spike, the beam had returned, slamming into the bow of the very ship that had fired it. The reckoning came at the speed of light. On the bridge of the Balance, the tactical display showed a blinding flare of light where the Xylos flagship had been. Jax gasped. Direct hit! Prelate Koth's own weapon struck his own vessel. The reflection was perfect. The Xylos dreadnought, its forward shields calibrated to project outwards, was completely unprepared for an attack from a dead-ahead vector with its own energy signature. The bow of the massive warship simply vaporized. Alarms blared across the entire Xylos fleet. Confusion reigned. Their sensors, which had been looking for ships, were not programmed to understand a wall of pure reflection. They saw their own weapons firing, and then their own ships exploding. One by one, other Xylos captains reacting to the sudden chaos fired their own cannons, and one by one their own beams were returned to sender. Multiple hits across their line. Jax called out, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. Their formation is breaking. They're firing wildly. They're shooting at ghosts. Rostova said, her voice grim. They see phantom energy readings, their own reflections, and they are firing at themselves. Agora broadcast on all Xylos frequencies. Open channel, no encryption. We did not fire a single shot. The channel opened. Rostova stood. This is Admiral Rostova. Cease fire immediately. Your own weapons are destroying you. We have not launched a single projectile. You are firing into a mirror. I repeat, you are firing into a mirror. Stand down your weapons. Panic and Doctrine fought a brief violent war in the minds of the Xylos commanders. Some hesitated. Others, enraged and confused, fired again, only to see their own ships suffer catastrophic damage. The perfect rigid line of the blockade had dissolved into a self-immolating cluster of chaos. The coolant hiss from the tactical console beside Jax seemed louder in the sudden lull. Prelate Koth's crippled flagship, venting atmosphere from its shattered bow, finally managed to broadcast a garbled, furious message. This is a trick, a human deception. All ships recalibrate your sensors. Target the source of the field. But it was too late. The damage was done. The psychological crack had been created. Rostova's strategy had not just broken their blockade. It had broken their certainty. It had turned their greatest strength, overwhelming focused firepower, into their most immediate weakness. They were defeated by their own reflection. Agora, what's the status of their fleet? Rostova asked, her eyes never leaving the holotank, where the crimson icons of the Xylos fleet were now in disarray. 7 vessels have sustained critical damage from their own weapons. The AI reported coolly. 15 more have significant damage. Their command structure is in chaos. Prelate Koth's ship is venting its primary drive plasma. They are no longer a coherent fighting force. The sapphire light of Agora's avatar seemed to shine with a cold, logical satisfaction. They're trying to target the drones, Jax noted. But their beams are too wide. They can't pinpoint them without hitting the reflective field and risking another feedback loop. Rostova nodded. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. To fight the mirror, they had to shoot at it. But to shoot at it was to defeat themselves. It was a perfect strategic paradox, a weaponized philosophy. Maintain the lattice, she ordered, and prepare the convoy for immediate transit. Plot a course through the gap we've created. The gate is now open. The civilian ships, which had been holding their positions with agonizing discipline, began to move. Their engines flared to life, pushing them forward into the safe corridor carved out by the Xylos' self-inflicted wounds. The horizon's hope led the way, a symbol of defiance sliding past the crippled remnants of the enemy fleet. On its bridge, the little girl who had been watching at the viewport now saw the human warships as something more than guardians. They were teachers. The cost of the maneuver had not been zero. 2 of the mirror drones had been overloaded by the sheer intensity of the reflected energy, their systems fried. On the balance, the primary energy conduits were running dangerously hot, the heat shimmer visible in the air around the engineering access panels. The ship's heartbeat, its internal vibration, had a frantic, strained quality. A minor plasma burn had been reported in a starboard EPS manifold, injuring 2 crew members, though not seriously. The victory was clean, but not without a price. Convoy is passing through the blockade line, Jax confirmed. They're clear. Xylos forces are not pursuing. They seem to be regrouping, or trying to. They are trying to understand, Rostova corrected him. They are trying to fit what just happened into a doctrine that has no room for it. How do you classify an enemy who defeats you without firing a weapon? The question was rhetorical. It was the very lesson she had intended to teach. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. The Xylos had tried to put a collar on a free people. In response, Rostova had held up a ledger, showing them the cost of their own actions in real time. The balance had been settled. "Admiral," Agora's calm voice cut through her thoughts. "I am detecting a new energy signature. A single Xylos vessel approaching from their rear echelon. It is not powering weapons, it is broadcasting a diplomatic code." "A diplomatic code?" Jax sounded skeptical. "After this, put it on screen." Rostova ordered, her brow furrowed. Had Koth been relieved of command, or was this something else, a new kind of puzzle? The game had changed, but it was not over. The ship on the screen was not a dreadnought. It was smaller, sleeker, and it lacked the overtly aggressive weapon emplacements of the blockade fleet. An insignia on its hull marked it as a vessel of the Xylos Observer, cast a class of ship rarely seen in military engagements. They were the adjudicators and recorders of the collective. The hail came through, and a new face appeared. This Xylos was older, her features less severe, her obsidian eyes holding not fury, but a deep, unsettling curiosity. "Admiral Rostova," the new Xylos began, her voice smoother than Koth's. "I am Observer Prime Tarsus. Prelate Koth has been relieved of his command. The ultimatum doctrine as applied in this instance has failed. We are here to record the outcome and understand the method." Rostova met her gaze, sensing that this was a far more dangerous opponent than the blustering prelate. Koth was a hammer, predictable and brutal. This observer was a scalpel. "The method was simple, Observer Prime," Rostova said. "We refused to play your game by your rules. We introduced a new one, accountability." Tarsus tilted her head, a slow, deliberate motion. "You weaponized reflection, a fascinating concept. You did not destroy our ships. You merely provided the conditions for them to destroy themselves. You have added a new chapter to our tactical archives." A faint hum emanated from Rostova's command chair, a subtle sensory cue that Agora was analyzing the observer's speech patterns for deception. A new debt was being entered on the ledger. "We would prefer that you learned from it rather than just archiving it," Rostova replied. "The principle is simple. What you send out, you will receive in return. It applies to energy beams as well as to ultimatums." The Observer Prime was silent for a long moment. The damaged Xylos fleet was attempting to form a ragged defensive perimeter behind her ship. The lights on several of the dreadnoughts were flickering, their power systems unstable. "Your point is noted, Admiral. However, the collective's primary objective remains. The genetic archives and terraforming matrices on that convoy are deemed a destabilizing element in this quadrant. Their uncontrolled proliferation represents a threat." "The growth of life is not a threat," Rostova countered, her voice hardening. "It is the purpose of a civilization. We will not surrender them." "We did not expect you to," Tarsus said calmly. "The failure of the ultimatum doctrine in this engagement does not invalidate the collective's strategic goals. It merely necessitates a change in methodology." A new mystery was unfolding. This wasn't a surrender or a retreat. It was a pivot. Jax shifted uneasily at his console. "Admiral, I'm getting strange readings from the observer's ship. It's emitting a low-frequency resonance wave. It's subtle. Not a weapon, but it's permeating the area." They were not asking. They were changing the board. Agora analyzed that frequency. Rostova commanded, her eyes locked on Tarsus. "What is its purpose?" "The frequency matches patterns associated with gravimetric distortion," Agora reported after a few seconds of processing. "It is subtle, but it is causing micro-fluctuations in local space-time. The effect is cumulative. I believe they are attempting to destabilize the primary star of this system, Admiral." The statement fell like a block of ice into the warm bridge. It was an act of unthinkable cosmic vandalism. To destabilize a star was to threaten the entire system, to create a long-term hazard that would render the shipping lanes and nearby planets uninhabitable for centuries. It was a scorched earth tactic of the highest order. Observer! Rostova's voice was dangerously low. You would risk a stellar collapse just to deny this convoy passage. Tarsus's expression was unreadable. The ultimatum was that the archives would not pass. If the route itself ceases to exist, the ultimatum is fulfilled. The doctrine does not specify the method, only the outcome. It is a logical, if resource-intensive, solution. This was the true face of their philosophy. Not just the threat of violence, but the utter disregard for consequence on a cosmic scale, as long as the initial demand was met. They would poison the well for everyone rather than admit defeat. The stakes had just escalated from a fleet engagement to the potential destruction of an entire solar system. You don't argue with gravity, you leave. The resonance wave is growing stronger, Jax warned. The star's chromosphere is already showing signs of fluctuation. They aren't bluffing. Rostova's mind raced. The mirror lattice was useless against a low-frequency wave. A frontal attack on the observer's ship was possible, but the rest of the Xylos fleet, damaged as it was, would engage them. The convoy would be caught in the crossfire. They had won the battle but were about to lose the war in a way she had never anticipated. This was Tarsus's trap, a checkmate played on a scale she had not been prepared for. Agora, she said, her voice tight. Calculate the time to stellar instability. How long do we have? The AI's sapphire light flickered. At the current rate of amplification, the star will reach a critical cascade point in 32 hours. However, the gravimetric shear will render navigation in this system impossible in less than 3. We have a 3-hour window to get the convoy clear. 3 hours. The convoy, even at maximum burn, would need at least 5 to clear the system's gravity well and make a safe jump to hyperspace. Tarsus had them pinned. They could save themselves, but not the colonists. Or they could stay and fight and doom everyone when the star went critical. The conflict triangle was complete: Rostova's moral imperative to protect the civilians, Agora's cold calculus of escape, and the Xylos's doctrine of victory at any cost. Their logic was a prison, and they intended to lock the door from the outside. Admiral, Jack said, his face pale. The convoy can't make it. Not in time. I am aware, Commander, she said, her gaze distant. For a moment she allowed herself to feel the crushing weight of the dilemma. Tarsus had presented her with an unwinnable scenario. Any choice she made led to a catastrophic loss. The Observer Prime was still on the screen, her face a mask of patient observation, waiting to see which way the human moral compass would break. Rostova turned away from the screen, her back to the Xylos judge. She looked at her crew, at the tense faces of men and women who had trusted her, who had just performed a flawless military operation. She looked at the sapphire glow of Agora, the embodiment of pure logic, that she knew would be advising her to cut their losses and save the fleet. Agora, Rostova asked, her voice quiet but clear. Give me a solution that saves the convoy. The light of the AI pulsed slowly. There is no solution with a high probability of success, Admiral. All viable models indicate either the loss of the convoy or the loss of the fleet, or both. The most logical course of action is to escort the convoy as far as possible and then retreat before the system becomes unnavigable. We could save approximately 60% of our own forces. The math of survival was a brutal thing. That is not a solution, Rostova stated flatly. That is a defeat. Find me another way. She began to pace the command deck, a slow, deliberate circuit. The deck plates were still warm from the energy expenditure of the lattice. The low hum of the ship felt like a caged animal. She needed to turn this inside out. Tarsus had changed the game from a corridor to a collapsing room. How do you escape a collapsing room? You don't. You brace the ceiling. A new idea, audacious and terrifying, began to form in her mind. It was a seed of a plan so risky that Agora's logic centers would likely reject it outright. It involved taking the Xylos's own weapon, the destabilizing resonance, and using it for her own purpose. It was a mirror of a different kind. "The observer's ship is the source of the wave, correct?" she asked, stopping to face Agora's avatar. "Correct, Admiral. It is the focal point. And the wave is affecting the star because the star has immense gravity," she continued, thinking aloud. "What else in this system has a significant gravity well?" Agora processed the question. "The fifth planet is a gas giant with a gravitational field approximately 1.7% that of the primary star. There are also 3 smaller dwarf planets and 97 catalogued asteroids over 500 kilometers in diameter. Their gravitational influence is negligible in this context." "Not negligible," Rostova whispered. "Just smaller. The Xylos are using a key to turn a lock. They are tuning their resonance wave to the specific gravimetric frequency of the star." A flicker of a new mystery began to dawn. Why that specific frequency? Was it the only one that worked, or just the most destructive? They had chosen the biggest hammer, but the nail had other properties. "Agora," she commanded, a new energy in her voice, "run a simulation. What would happen if we introduced our own resonance wave into the system, not to counter theirs, but to supplement it? A second frequency tuned not to the star, but to the gas giant." The sapphire light of the AI flickered rapidly, processing the radical new variable. Jax looked at her, his expression a mix of confusion and dawning comprehension. "Admiral, you want to help them?" "I want to change their target," Rostova clarified. "They are pushing on a mountain, hoping to cause a landslide. I am suggesting we start pushing on a much smaller rock right next to it." After a long 10 seconds, Agora replied, its voice tinged with something that might have been synthetic surprise. "The simulation is interesting, Admiral. If we broadcast a harmonic resonance tuned to the gas giant, it would begin to create its own gravimetric distortions. The 2 waves, ours and the Xylos, would interfere with each other. The result would not be a cancellation. It would be a complex, chaotic amplification. The landslide would become unpredictable," Rostova finished. "The safe 3-hour window Tarsus has calculated for her own fleet's escape would vanish. The system would become unstable for everyone everywhere all at once." It was a threat of mutual annihilation, but with a crucial difference. The Xylos believed they were outside the blast zone of their own weapon. Rostova's plan was to drag them back inside. "It is a reckless strategy, Admiral." Agora stated, its logical core struggling with the sheer risk. "The energy expenditure would be immense and controlling. The resulting gravimetric chaos would be impossible. We would be gambling with the entire system, including ourselves." The AI was right. It was a gamble. But Tarsus had mistaken her for a player who would fold. "We do not fold. We raise the stakes." Rostova turned to face the main screen again, her decision made. The Observer Prime was still there, waiting patiently for the inevitable human retreat. "Commander Jax," Rostova ordered, "begin retuning our main deflector dish. I want it ready to broadcast a high-energy gravimetric wave. Agora, calculate the precise frequency needed to create a harmonic resonance with the gas giant Epsilon 7b." "Admiral, I must advise against this." Agora protested, its sapphire light pulsing with urgency. "The probability of our own destruction is over 70%, and the probability of the convoy's survival, if we do nothing, is 0, Rostova countered. "Your logic is sound, Agora, but it lacks intent. The Xylos believe we will act to preserve ourselves. We will act to preserve our charges. It is a variable their doctrine has never been able to model correctly." Her arc was bending not from restraint to decisiveness, but from reactive defense to proactive righteous risk. She looked at Jax. "Commander, do you have a problem with those orders?" Jax met her gaze, and a slow, fierce grin spread across his face. "No, Admiral. Not a single problem. It's time someone taught the Xylos that when you decide to burn down the house, you'd better be sure everyone you want to hurt is still inside." They wanted a reckoning. We were about to give them one. A new civilian vignette began to form in Rostova's mind unbidden. Aboard one of the rearmost convoy ships, a young engineer rerouted auxiliary power to their main drive, trying to coax another fraction of a percentage of speed out of the straining engines. He knew the odds. He had seen the calculations. But he worked anyway, his hands steady because the fleet was still with them. They hadn't run. That simple fact, that act of solidarity, was more powerful than any engine. It was the fuel that mattered. "Observer Prime Tarsus," Rostova said, her voice now ringing with an authority that seemed to press outwards, filling the bridge. "You have made a grave miscalculation. You assumed your doctrine of inevitability was the most powerful force in this system. It is not." Tarsus's head tilted again, that gesture of analytical curiosity. "And what, Admiral, is a more powerful force? The promise we made to the people on those ships," Rostova answered. "You have 30 of your minutes to cease your resonance broadcast and withdraw. If you do not, we will be forced to introduce a new variable to your stellar equation. We will make this system as dangerous for you as you intended to make it for us." A new ultimatum had been issued. For the first time, a flicker of something unreadable crossed the observer's face. It might have been disbelief. It might have been respect. "You would destroy yourselves to spite us. You mistake our motives," Rostova said, the finality of her decision settling into her bones like steel. "We are not acting out of spite. We are acting to protect. You see a convoy to be eliminated. We see a nursery that must be shielded, even if we have to collapse the roof on everyone to do it. Your move, observer." She gave a crisp nod to Jax. "Cut the channel." The screen went blank. The bridge was silent, save for the hum of the ship's systems and the faint, almost sub-audible thrum of the deflector dish, beginning its massive power-up. Every person on the bridge knew the gamble they were about to take. They were holding a trigger to a weapon that had no aim, only a blast radius that encompassed them all. "Deflector dish is at 50% power," Jax reported, his voice steady. "The resonance frequency is locked in. We can broadcast on your command." "Hold," Rostova said. She watched the main display. The Xylos ships were not moving. Tarsus was calling her bluff. The observer's cold logic would tell her that the humans would not commit such a suicidal act. Their own AI had told them it was illogical. She was betting on human self-preservation. It was a poor bet. The star in the holotank was beginning to show angry red mottles across its surface. The gravimetric distortions were becoming more violent. Time was running out. Rostova's heart beat a steady rhythm, a counterpoint to the impending chaos. She had offered them a way out. They had refused. The ledger was clear. 20 minutes left on our ultimatum." Jack set his knuckles white where he gripped his console. Rostova watched and waited. The entire fleet held its breath, a collection of souls poised on the knife's edge of a decision that would either save a civilization or obliterate two fleets. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Then Agora spoke, its voice calm and clear. "Admiral, the Xylos resonance wave is powering down." A collective silent exhalation swept through the bridge. On the screen, the angry red blotches on the star began to fade. The gravimetric shear warnings turned from crimson to amber. Tarsus had blinked. "She's withdrawing," Jax breathed, watching the Xylos icons begin to turn, their formation breaking as they moved to a safe distance. The observer's ship was among them. "She did not believe we would do it," Rostova said. But the possibility, however illogical, was a variable she could not afford to ignore. She chose to preserve her forces rather than risk them on a gamble of our psychology. The logic of the ultimatum doctrine had finally folded back on itself. Faced with a truly unacceptable cost, the Xylos had backed down. They had finally learned how to count. A collective sigh of relief, unspoken but deeply felt, washed over the bridge of the balance. On the main holotank, the crimson icons of the Xylos fleet were in full retreat, their disciplined formation, a stark contrast to the chaos of their recent defeat. The menacing resonance hum that had vibrated through the hull faded into silence, leaving only the steady, familiar thrum of the ship's own life support. The immediate crisis had passed. The convoy was safe and moving toward the system's edge. "They're really running," Jax murmured, a note of wonder in his voice. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, the tension of the last hour draining from his features, leaving exhaustion in its place. "I didn't think they had it in them. They are running because their logic dictated it." Agora stated its sapphire avatar, a steady pillar of light. The risk to their fleet became greater than the value of the objective. It was a simple calculation. Rostova did not share their relief. A cold knot of unease was tightening in her gut. She watched the retreating Xylos fleet. Her gaze narrowed in suspicion. It was too clean, too orderly. Tarsus was not a creature of simple calculation. She was an observer, a strategist who saw the board not just in its current state but 10 moves ahead. This felt less like a retreat and more like a reset. "The quiet is a weapon too, Agora," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet sense of victory. "Run a full analysis on their withdrawal pattern. Compare it to all known Xylos retreats, both genuine and feigned. I want to know if this is textbook or an anomaly." The AI's light pulsed. "Acknowledged, Admiral. The analysis is underway. Initial comparisons do show a higher-than-average adherence to tactical formation for a fleet that has just suffered a doctrinal collapse." "Exactly," Rostova murmured. She paced across the deck, the soft soles of her boots making no sound. Koth would have retreated in disarray. He was a beast of passion for all his talk of logic. Tarsus is different. She doesn't feel defeat. She records it and learns from it. The lingering scent of ozone from the powered-up deflector dish was fading, replaced by the faint metallic smell of overworked circuitry. The convoy, a straggling line of bright signatures on the display, was now halfway to the system's jump point. They were still hours away from safety, hours of vulnerability. "Commander, what is the status of the convoy?" "All ships report their systems are back online after our warning shot," Jax replied. "They're pushing their engines to the limit. Estimated time to safe jump is 4 hours 47 minutes. He paused. "They're celebrating over their admiral, sending us messages of thanks." A feeling of profound responsibility settled on Rostova's shoulders. Those messages of thanks, that celebration, were predicated on a victory she was no longer sure she had won. "Keep them focused, Jax. Tell them to maintain sensor vigilance and report any anomalies, no matter how small." This wasn't an ending. It was an intermission. The bridge fell into a tense, watchful silence. The crew, sensing the Admiral's unease, had suppressed their own relief, their focus returning to their consoles. The only sounds were the quiet clicking of keys and the soft hum of the environmental systems. Minutes stretched into an hour. The convoy crept farther away. The retreating Xylos fleet was nearing the edge of sensor range. Everything appeared normal, and that was what worried her the most. Then Agora spoke, its calm tone doing nothing to soften the blow of its words. "Admiral, the analysis is complete. This is not a retreat." The cold knot in Rostova's stomach turned to ice. "Explain." "The Xylos fleet's withdrawal is a textbook strategic repositioning," the AI reported. "Furthermore, I have isolated a pattern of low-energy transmissions between the retreating ships. They are not communication signals. They are synchronization pings. They are coordinating with something." The sapphire light brightened. "And I have found what they are coordinating with. Long-range sensors have just detected a massive fleet emerging from hyperspace at the system's edge, directly on the convoy's exit vector." A new set of icons bloomed on the holotank, a sea of hostile crimson that dwarfed the fleet they had just faced. There were hundreds of them. The real battle had not even begun. "It's a trap," Jax whispered, his face ashen. Tarsus's fleet was just the bait. They were meant to lose to herd the convoy into the open. "Into a perfectly prepared kill box." Rostova finished her voice, a low, dangerous growl. The entire engagement, from the first ultimatum to the stellar resonance threat, had been a charade, a multi-layered deception to maneuver them into this exact position. Tarsus hadn't blinked because of a threat. She had folded because her part of the plan was complete. "But how will they target the convoy?" Jax asked, his mind racing through the tactical implications. "Even with that many ships, a long-range volley against moving targets is inefficient. We can screen them." "They will not need to target them," Agora said, its voice grim. "I have cross-referenced the synchronization pings with faint parasitic energy signals I am now detecting from within the convoy itself." During the initial blockade, the Xylos seeded the space around the convoy with cloaked micro-drones. The drones attached themselves to the civilian ships' hulls. They are not weapons. They are targeting transponders. The full weight of the strategy hit them. The new fleet would have instantaneous, perfect firing solutions on every civilian ship. The human fleet's shields, their evasive maneuvers, their entire defensive posture would be rendered meaningless. They had written the convoy's name on every bullet. Before the alarm could be raised, a father on the colony ship, New Dawn, lifted his daughter up to the main observation deck's viewport. "Look," he said, his voice full of awe and relief. "That's the jump point. That's our new home." The little girl, no older than 5, pressed her fingers to the glass, her eyes wide as she stared at the distant shimmering veil of hyperspace. She saw a promise. She couldn't see the hundreds of executioners waiting on the other side. "How long until the main fleet is in firing range?" Rostova snapped, her mind already discarding old plans and racing to build a new one. "At their current velocity, they will be in optimal range in 25 minutes, Agora replied. "Their weapon systems are already powering up. 25 minutes. Not enough time to run. Not enough time to hide." A head-on fight against a force of that size was suicide. The conflict triangle had returned with a vengeance. Her moral duty to protect the convoy was crashing against the mathematical certainty of their annihilation. Tarsus had finally created a problem with only one solution. Unless they could break the equation itself, "The transponders are the key," Rostova said, her voice sharp with focus. "If they can't target the convoy, their numbers mean nothing. They'll be firing blind into an open area of space. We can't shoot them off," Jax countered. "They're too small and we'd risk hitting the civilian ships." "We won't shoot," Rostova said, a desperate, brilliant plan forming from the ashes of their situation. "We'll burn them out. Agora, what is the maximum output of our primary communications array if we repurposed it to broadcast a wide-spectrum electromagnetic pulse A data scour?" The AI processed the request. The deck plates beneath them hummed as power was rerouted in preparation for the potential command. The energy required would be substantial. It would necessitate draining our secondary shield emitters. The pulse would be powerful enough to fry any unshielded high-gain electronic device within a 500,000-kilometer radius. "It would disable the Xylos transponders," Rostova confirmed. "Yes," Agora said. "But it would also disable the convoy's external sensors, communications, and navigation systems for several minutes. We would be blinding them and deafening them in the middle of a kill zone. The risk of collision or straying into the line of fire is significant." The cure was also a poison. Here it was, the ultimate test. To save the civilians, she would have to risk crippling them first. It was a choice that no commander ever wanted to make. She looked at Jax, whose face was a mask of grim determination. He knew what she was going to decide. He trusted her. That trust was a heavier weight than any starship. "Open a channel to the entire convoy, priority 1. Rostova commanded. "Patch me through myself." "Channel open, Admiral." Her face appeared on the view screen of every civilian ship, a calm anchor in their sea of celebration. This is Admiral Rostova. You are in extreme danger. A new, larger Xylos fleet is waiting for you at the jump point. They have placed targeting transponders on your ships. We are your only shield, but it will not be enough. A wave of panic and disbelief flooded the civilian channels, a chaotic wash of voices that Jax quickly muted, leaving only her broadcast. In 60 seconds, Rostova continued, her voice unwavering. We are going to release a targeted electromagnetic pulse designed to disable those transponders. Your own systems will be affected. You must, I repeat, you must shut down all non-essential and external electronic systems immediately. Power down everything but life support and primary inertial dampeners. Trust us. We will be your eyes and your shield. Rostova out. We will become the anchor in their darkness. She cut the channel. Jax, signal the fleet. I want every ship to move. Form a shield wall between the convoy and the Xylos fleet. Position us to absorb the initial volley. Agora, begin the power drain from the shield emitters to the comms array. Executing. Agora confirmed. Secondary shields are failing. Rerouting power. The comms array is charging. It will be ready to discharge in 45 seconds. The balance shuddered as its energy configuration was violently altered. Warning lights flashed on Jax's console. We're exposed, Admiral. If they fire early. They won't, Rostova said with a certainty she didn't feel. Tarsus is methodical. She will wait for the perfect moment. The ships of the Third Fleet moved with practiced, desperate speed, forming a thin, defiant line in the void. They were a shield of metal and courage, preparing to take a blow meant for the defenseless. On the holotank, the civilian ship's lights began to wink out as they followed her orders, their signatures dimming one by one. Comms array charged, Agora announced. 20 seconds until the Xylos are in range. Convoy is dark, Jax confirmed. They're trusting us. A moment of perfect, terrifying faith. Rostova held her breath. The fate of thousands rested on the next few seconds. Agora, fire the pulse. Now. There was no sound, but the entire ship felt like it had been struck by a giant tuning fork. A wave of pure disruptive energy, invisible to the naked eye, erupted from the balance's communications dish and washed over the convoy. On the tactical display, the faint parasitic energy signals from the Xylos transponders flickered and vanished. At the exact same instant, the Xylos main fleet fired. A storm of energy beams, hundreds of them, crossed the void in a heartbeat. The attack was perfectly synchronized, a testament to Xylos discipline. For a microsecond, the beams held their perfect trajectory toward the now invisible civilian ships. Then their guidance data vanished. The transponders they were screaming toward were gone. The beams continued on their last known vector. The silence was the sound of the trap springing. Instead of hitting the convoy, the massive volley slammed into the hastily formed shield wall of the Third Fleet. The bridge of the balance was rocked by a violent explosion as a stray beam impacted the port bow. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the stark crimson glow of emergency lighting. Sparks rained down from a ruptured conduit overhead. "Report!" Rostova yelled, gripping the arms of her command chair to stay upright. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt electronics and the metallic tang of ionized particles. "Direct hit on the frigate Steadfast, she's gone," Jax called out, his voice strained. "The Vigilance reports critical damage to her engines. We've taken a heavy blow to our own port shields, they're completely gone. Multiple casualties reported on decks 4 and 7. The cost of victory. It was always paid in blood and steel, but the convoy was alive. The gamble had worked. Now erase the map. Agora, status of the enemy fleet," Rostova demanded, pushing past the pain of her own losses. "The Xylos are momentarily confused." The AI's voice came through the speakers, steady as ever despite the chaos. "Their primary targeting system has failed. They are resorting to broad-spectrum sensor sweeps to reacquire their targets. They are blind." The advantage had shifted. The Xylos' perfect plan had crumbled into a conventional engagement they were not prepared for. They had expected an execution, not a battle. They have lost their initiative, Rostova declared, a cold fire in her eyes. And we are going to make them pay for every scratch on our paint. She stood up, her form silhouetted against the crimson emergency lights. Open a channel to Tarsus, all frequencies. I want her to hear me. Jax, his face grim, complied. Channel is open. The face of Observer Prime Tarsus appeared on the auxiliary monitor. There was no curiosity now, only a flicker of cold, analytical rage. She had been outmaneuvered twice. Observer Prime. Rostova's voice was as hard and unforgiving as the vacuum of space. Your trap has failed. Your targeting system is gone. Your advantage is a memory. You stand before a fleet that is now defending its own, and we are prepared to die to the last soul to see them safe. They had come to execute. They would stay for a reckoning. You have two choices. Rostova continued, pressing her sudden, brutal advantage. You can commit your forces to a battle of attrition against a fleet that has proven it can outthink you at every turn. You will suffer losses you cannot justify. Or you can take your broken doctrine and your dishonored fleet and leave our space. Now. Tarsus stared from the screen, her obsidian eyes processing the new reality. Her superior numbers were now just a larger collection of targets for a human fleet that was fighting with the fury of a cornered animal. The cold arithmetic had changed. The potential cost of victory had just soared past the value of the objective. The seconds ticked by, each one a lifetime. The Third Fleet, battered but not broken, held its position, its weapons hot and ready. The Xylos fleet, a vast and silent giant, waited for the command of its Observer Prime. Your point, Tarsus said finally, each word seemingly carved from granite, is tactically sound. The screen went blank. On the main holotank, the sea of crimson icons hesitated for a long moment. Then slowly, ponderously, they began to turn. They did not fire another shot. The Xylos main fleet, the great and terrible weapon of the collective, was withdrawing. For real this time. Their ledger had run out of room. A ragged cheer went up on the bridge of the balance. It was a sound of disbelief, of exhaustion, and of profound, hard-won victory. Jack slumped in his chair, running a trembling hand over his face. Rostova remained standing, watching until the last enemy ship had faded from the sensors. Only then did she allow herself to sink back into her command throne. Agora, she said, her voice soft now. Get me a full damage report, and tell the convoy. Tell them the way is clear. The aftermath was a flurry of controlled professional activity. The Third Fleet tended to its wounded and its dead. The frigate Steadfast was lost with all hands, a heavy price for the lives of the colonists. The Vigilance was crippled but stable, her crew heroically fighting to keep her alive. The Balance itself had suffered significant damage, its port side scarred and blackened. The cost had been high, but the promise had been kept. One by one, the 34 civilian ships jumped to the safety of hyperspace, their lights winking out of existence like candles being gently extinguished. Each one that vanished was a mark on the positive side of the ledger. A formal message was dispatched to the Galactic Concord containing the unedited logs from the entire engagement. It detailed the Xylos ultimatum, the mirror lattice defense, the threat of stellar collapse, and the final brutal trap. The message concluded with a simple declarative statement. The Xylos Collective's ultimatum doctrine has been tested and found wanting. It is an instrument of terror, not of stability. We will no longer honor it, and any future use against civilian populations will be met with a response calculated to reflect the total and absolute cost of our protection. Days later, on the public data streams, a quiet notification appeared. On the Concord's official ledger of interstellar relations, the Xylos Collective's diplomatic status was downgraded. Their special privileges to issue binding ultimatums in contested sectors were indefinitely rescinded. The precedent was set. Weeks later, Admiral Eva Rostova stood on the observation deck of the newly repaired Balance. The ship was docked at Titan Orbital. The great rings of Saturn, a majestic, silent backdrop. The bridge was quiet, the scars of the battle meticulously erased, but she could still feel their memory in the very bones of the ship. The main holotank, once a canvas of crimson threats, now displayed the serene deep space blue of a peaceful star chart. They hadn't won because they were stronger or smarter. They had won because the Xylos saw the convoy as a collection of assets, a line item on a strategic balance sheet. Rostova and her fleet saw them as a promise, a future that had to be protected at any cost. The Xylos Doctrine had failed because it could never properly calculate the weight of a kept promise. It was a variable that broke every equation they had. They tallied threats, we answered for souls. Promises outweigh threats.